Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Brookline Interactive Group's show, The Safety Net, dedicated to educating the public about domestic violence in Brookline and elsewhere. I'm Susan Howards, a local attorney in Brookline with a focus on domestic violence. I defend batterers and I also represent victims because it's my feeling if you only address one side of the equation, you will never solve the problem. And because of our guest today, you will know we have not quite solved the problem. With us today is Susan Ross, Executive Director of Second Step, an amazing organization in Newton that provides resources, housing, legal help to those in transition. Welcome, Susan.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Susan.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get to Second Step and how long have you been there?
Sure. So I started my legal career as an assistant district attorney in the Middlesex DA's office in the domestic violence unit and prosecuted for about 5 years batterers in the district court. And, as you said, you really have to come at this problem many different ways. And there's a really strong role for the criminal justice system and holding people accountable and punishing them for, what is a personal, a crime that creates very personal harm, but also community harm. And so it's really important that people are held accountable through the criminal justice system. I got a little frustrated because we would often see people returning to the courts, calling the police again, having a criminal activity or prosecution was not the solution to this problem. And so people would keep coming back. And I really thought, the next thing I did, I really wanted to work somewhere where we sort of looked at the whole situation, the whole family, and understood what is it that people need to help solve this problem. When victims would come to us in the court system, often they didn't want to go forward with the case, even though they had called the police for immediate protection. When it came down to it, they were either scared to testify because of potential retaliation.
Yep.
They were nervous about what would happen if the abuser was actually put in jail and then wasn't working or providing child support or child care. People in these relationships, they didn't marry a monster. So often there's love and family ties, there's culture, there's all kinds of reasons that people don't want to proceed through a criminal justice system, but still really need a lot of help and support. And so I looked for an organization that I thought, sort of helped with more of the whole person and the whole family. And the Second Step does that. And so I actually started as a volunteer there, as a volunteer attorney. And over time, just gradually kept at them. And I became a staff attorney, a paid staff attorney, then the director of the legal program. And now I'm the executive director of the organization. And so I've been involved about 10 years.
And what is the overall focus of a Second Step? Why is it called Second Step?
So we started about 30 years ago as a shelter. A bunch of volunteers who worked in emergency shelters for domestic violence victims noticed that when people were timing out of their emergency shelter stay, they hadn't had enough time to get back on their feet and remove the obstacles that were keeping them in a dangerous situation. And they were just going back home and getting, re-victimized. So these volunteers started our shelter, which is called the Second Step. The first step is fleeing, and the second step is removing obstacles to safety and stability. And so people were allowed to come and stay for up to 2 years in our shelter, receive wraparound services so that they could move on to a safe, stable future. We have since grown from a shelter that housed 8 families to housing on a temporary basis up to 17 families.
Wow.
We also have a rapid rehousing program so that people who may not want to or need to come into congregate living and want to go right to their own apartment, they can do that with rental subsidies and with services that help them remain stable and safe. We also
and do you help them find the apartment, Susan? Do you help them find, because there's not much available. My understanding is there's not much available for immediate use. Am I right about that?
You are right about that. And it's been a problem. Generally, it's been a problem in the greater Boston area, for a while. And now we have an even more acute problem. So, we've had great success actually housing people and keeping them housed up to a year. We measure up to a year or 2 years later, and that people are still housed, because we're not just giving them an apartment, we're giving them the skills they need to maintain that apartment on their own. So
What
job
skills,
and
Susan?
language skills.
What skills? Language skills?
Language, job, help with immigration so people can get working papers, budgeting, financial wellness, so they understand how to save money, how to be paying their rent. We have had, the housing has slowed down recently because we, like every other organization, is struggling to find housing in the Boston area. It's really become a crisis, as people know. Then we also have our free legal services program, where we help people with immigration, restraining orders, family law, because if you don't solve those problems, then you can't be safe, you can't move on until you have a divorce and child support and a custody arrangement.
When people come to you, they can bring their children. Can they bring their pets?
So we do, we are open to singles and families. We are not able at this point to accommodate pets, but it is one of my big dreams that in the next number of years, we will be able to accommodate pets. I, like you, am a dog owner and lover. And we know that people stay in a dangerous relationship because they wouldn't leave their pet. And I understand that completely. I also know that pets are a huge emotional support. So if you're going through trauma and you're trying to heal, it helps to have your companion with you. And so we don't have the capacity yet, but it is something that I care about and would really like to see.
That's really great. I want to bring you up to date. Recently, there was a horrific domestic violence experience. I don't know how to put it, in Newton. Would you be willing to talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
The mom and her kids called the police. Would you fill us in on that? Because it was just, we've had a number of them this year, starting with Cohasset, Duxbury, and other places. Yeah, let's hear what you have to say about Newton. I was shocked.
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is, just in sort of response to you struggling to know what to call it, it's a murder.
You're right.
It was a domestic violence homicide occurred in Newton because, that is what it is. And I think sometimes people don't know what to say, but I don't want to dilute it. And then, so that is what it is. The thing that we say all the time and we know to be true is that domestic violence does not know any boundaries. It affects people of all races, ages, genders, gender identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic class, zip code, education, profession. We have people that we serve who are doctors, lawyers, nurses, teachers, daycare workers, clergy people, firefighters. So, as both the victims and the abusers. So this is, it knows no boundaries. And we saw that. I think people, there are stereotypes about it happening in poorer communities or less resource communities, and that's just not true. It's happening everywhere behind closed doors.
But this was particularly, I think, egregious to me because apparently the victim had obtained a restraining order 3 days before.
Right.
Am I correct? And
something like that. I don't know exactly. I believe she got it on Thursday and the murder was on Saturday. Yes.
Was on Saturday. So I know that there was an article in the Globe, which I responded to, basically saying restraining orders don't work. And I want to say very, very strongly, they do work. In many cases, they do work. And that is all we have. We fought for 30 years to get the restraining orders. It's not just a piece of paper. It has some clout. If a restraining order is violated, it's a criminal offense. So to have the press putting out that in this case, it didn't work, fine, I'll grant them that. But they do work, and I don't want people to think, oh, why should I bother to get a restraining order because it's not going to help you? Well, you know what? It is going to help you, hopefully. So there was a restraining order, And then this batterer must have just had so much rage, so much rage that his everything was blinded, because he's very concerned about his children. And one of his children, it's my understanding, 9-year-old, was the one who called the police. My dad's battering my mom.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I saw that news report and I saw your response, and I was so glad to see your response, because
Thank you.
we were actually, our organization was writing a response. I said, oh, okay, well, Susan took care of it for us. And then I was interviewed on a couple of news programs, and I tried to set the record straight as well. A restraining order is a tool. It's a valuable, powerful tool. Most of the time, most people are compliant. They understand the repercussions of having a criminal a criminal case. There's if you call the police with a restraining order, they come, they arrest somebody immediately, and now you're held you might be held for a period of time
Without bail.
without
for a certain
bail.
period of time.
And it's a serious thing, and most people do comply. And so I agree, it's, the takeaway should not be that restraining orders don't work, because in the vast majority of times they do work. We also know that when you change the dynamic of an abusive relationship by starting to leave or trying to take power away from an abuser, that can be a very dangerous time. And so when people come to the second step, we do safety planning with them in anticipation of the order, before and after it's issued, because it is a powerful tool, but you also have to be aware of that dynamic, that you may, that somebody may really be escalated because of this attempt to leave, what's perceived
Enraged.
Enraged. And so, there's no one to blame for this except for, the man who committed the crime, obviously. But, we do want people to understand that, you need to be employing as many tools as possible at the same time: a restraining order, safety planning, maybe another legal action with a divorce or custody and that kind of thing.
Right.
But you really have, there's not one solution to these problems. And so you come at it from a lot of different directions, and certainly with the very powerful tool of a restraining order.
Right. We're talking to Susan Ross, Executive Director of Second Step in Newton, which helps victims of domestic violence get on their feet, establish a life. When I first started in this business 32 years ago, I never heard the word mental health and domestic violence. Now I hear the word mental health with anything that anybody's doing, even if they're going to the playground. So I started substitute teaching adolescents who have mental challenges, because I don't know much about mental health. I'm not trained. I don't know much about trauma, but I've come to believe that at the core of domestic violence is trauma and the batterers. So I've learned a lot in the last 3 years. Would you address the issue of mental health and domestic violence?
Yeah, I agree. Mental health is a component of pretty much everything right now, whether it's education or domestic violence or employment. So, mental illness can be a factor in domestic violence, but it's not going to be the cause of it. And, both on both sides, so if there's a victim who's mentally ill, that may make them more vulnerable to abuse or to manipulation or coercion. And so we have to be aware of that. It can limit their ability to get help, to be believed. I mean, that's a big deal.
Yes.
For people who have a mental health disorder, or even if the mental health disorder is that they've been traumatized, we know so much more now about what that does to somebody's brain, about their ability to remember or tell a coherent story. And so, if you expect that everybody's going to come at a situation and be able to tell you exactly what happened when in perfect order and retell that story a bunch of times, that's not going to happen if you have mental illness or if you've been traumatized. And so I think the role of attorneys is to help judges understand that, to understand that somebody may come in with a scattered story, but that doesn't mean it's not true.
But often, Susan, they are just treated very dismissively in courts.
Absolutely.
I've seen, not my clients, I hope, but I've seen those who are pro se, the judges don't put up with the scattered relating of the story, and they just move, particularly after COVID, because we're so overloaded in the
Right.
courts, and they just sort of move the cases along, and the individual is just stymied, doesn't know what to do because they can't afford an attorney.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're almost, they're re-victimized by the system sometimes because they are, they're not believed, they're not attended to, they're not, and so that is one of the reasons why we, the second step, we have our legal services program where we continue to try to grow that program because we know it's so important to have an advocate with you in court to
Yes,
help
yes.
make your story come through and so that
Coherent,
it can
has to be
heard.
coherent, yeah,
Right.
coherent.
Right.
How do you see us moving forward, those of us who work in the field of domestic violence? How do you see us stopping these horrific murders? Because
Yeah.
this year seems to have had really horrific. The guy in Cohasset, who we can't find, the wife who was in Washington, blah, blah, blah. The woman in Duxbury who used the gym bands to strangle her children and then jumped out the window and is now a paraplegic. How can we maybe foresee, or maybe we can't, or prevent? What kind of work? And it isn't just education, because that doesn't seem to be doing the job quickly enough.
Well, I do think there has been there's studies done on dangerousness assessments, and there are factors that you can look at. And again, these are generalizations, so it's not going to hold true for every single case, but we know that, I mean, this seems obvious, but if there's a weapon in the house, you're more likely to be killed or hurt with it. If there is if somebody is disconnected from society, whether that's because they don't have a job, they're isolated, they have mental illness, they have a substance use disorder, that makes them less connected to, to society and maybe more likely to commit some really egregious level of harm. So there are ways that we can assess somebody's situation, help them understand the likelihood of something escalating, and help, again, safety planning. But something that you said at the beginning that I think is really true, and I do think the field needs to be moving in this direction, is this is everybody's problem. And so if you have a family that's experiencing domestic violence, there are problems with that unit, and there are problems that need to be addressed. I mean, hurt people hurt other people. So, to invest in batterers program or interventions around that, I see as a victim service. I don't see that as, helping a batterer. I see that as helping a batterer be less abusive and helping a victim,
I agree, Susan. You're familiar with the new program, I think it's new the last couple of years, called the Call for Change.
Yes.
2 women, yes, which is amazing. And I'll just explain it. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's not a hotline, but if I had the urge to hurt somebody in my family, I could pick up the phone and call this number, and then get, I think, somebody professional on the other line who will sort of talk me down, to the point where I'm not, and they've had a 50% increase in calls since they've started. That's number one. But I think we need shelters for batterers. If I get the urge to hurt somebody in my family, I'd like to know that I can walk out the door, go to a facility, walk in. Police aren't going to come after me, but there'll be professional people to help me get over that urge. And I really think that we have to look at that. I don't know where we're going to get the money.
I mean, I agree. And I think, I think that education and awareness is a big part of that solution, but it has to start way earlier. I think about, teenagers. We need to teach teenagers about a healthy relationship, but we need to teach teenagers about a healthy breakup and how to end a relationship and still be, not have it be a mortal wound to your ego or to your, and how do you just say, okay, we're not, we're going to end this relationship.
It's not working.
Move on, and there doesn't have to be a lot of posturing or hate or, getting even. So I think that the education is a big piece, but it has to start a lot younger so that we're truly preventing it, not trying to make it better once habits and beliefs and, you know,
Mhm.
ways of behaving are already established.
You said that you have families at Second Step, so you must have little kids who come
We
with the
do.
family. Do you do any kind of education or training with these families about what happens so that you can help these little kids understand why they're at Second Step, why their dad or whomever the significant other is in their life? How do you do that?
So we have a parenting group that it's run by one of our social work advocates.
Okay.
And it is about how to talk to your children about domestic violence, how to explain, you know, how to talk about the other parent, how to explain the situation.
Mm.
And that's for people, whether in our shelter or whether their other parent is living in the community. And, you know, and then also how to talk to your kid about being in shelter. And, you know, one of the things we have to talk to kids about is, you know, not telling, you know, a lot of kids still see their father. It's, you know, mostly fathers. They see them or they talk to them, but you can't tell them where you live. And how do you, you know, how do you get through that? And so that's the role of our advocates, is to help support our clients in managing those conversations with their
Wow.
kids.
Susan, in our last couple of minutes, one, how can we, the viewer, help you at Second Step, aside from money? I think everybody needs money. I'm going to speak
Mhm.
for you. And what would you say to the viewer to do in their own lives? Because I agree with you. Domestic violence isn't just between two people. It's family violence, and it spreads out into the community.
Yeah.
So it's really a community issue. So what can we do to help Second Step? And anything else you'd like to say?
Well, what I would like to say is we're based in Newton, but we serve people in the greater Boston area, including Brookline. We have represented people in restraining orders in Brookline District Court. We go to Norfolk Probate and Family Court. We have a relationship with the Brookline Police. So just, you know, for people who are in Brookline watching this, I want to make sure that they understand that we are here to help them as well. You know, one thing that I think is really important is for everyone to understand what are some warning signs, what are some red flags that you might see in a relationship, and what to do about it if you see it. Because I think particularly in the aftermath of, you know, a horrific incident, I know you know, a neighbor was interviewed on the news and said, you know, I wish we had known what to look for. And I think if people have more comfort, you know, destigmatizing domestic violence so that it's something we can talk about openly, and understanding some of the warning signs and what to say or do if you're worried about somebody, and how you can get help to support that friend, I think is something that everybody can and should do. You know, we all know how to do CPR in case we come across somebody who's having a heart attack. And I think it's something similar. I think we have to be looking out for each other. And we might not think we know anybody, but I guarantee that
Yes.
every single person knows somebody who is affected by this in some way. And it may not
I
be
agree.
physical right now. It might be financial, it might be emotional, it might be sexual, psychological, but it is prevalent. And, you know, we always say at Second Step, we believe survivors. So if you come and tell us that something's happening to you, but you think nobody will believe you because your husband is a doctor, a lawyer, a charming, handsome, funny, we understand that those people can do this too. And so that's the other thing, is if somebody comes to you with something, believe them. Believe them and don't brush it off and say, oh, not him, that couldn't be.
Exactly. Thank you, Susan Ross, Executive Director of Second Step. The content of this show is mine. Susan Howard's an attorney, and Susan's. It is not big. I hope you'll come back. I hope
would love
I'll
to.
see you at Brookline Day on
Yes.
September 10th, where the first time we're having a domestic violence table. Thank you and good luck. And
Thank you,
also
Susan.
put down how people can contact you. Make sure we have that so we can run it at the bottom.
Okay. Yep. I will. Let me see. Our phone number is our
Yes,
intake
let's
line.
have it.
617-965-2538.
Let's say it again, 617-965-2538.
2538.
Okay, thank
That's
you,
our
Susan
intake line.
Ross. Good luck. Bye.
Okay, thank you.